So I'm really excited. We're live on YouTube. If you were here for the Candy pre-show, you're welcome. That was unexpected treat for everybody this spooky season, but good morning, good afternoon. And I am so excited to have you all here with us today as we kick off our Hiring Great Data Science Teams panel. My name is Jessie Mostpak, and while I am currently a developer advocate with the Shiny team here at RStudio, not that long ago, I was a data science job seeker who eventually got their first data science job before moving into data science management. So I know that we have a lot of ground to cover today with our panelists, and I cannot wait for them to have the opportunity to share their advice and experiences with you. So we have four fantastic panelists. Today we'll be hearing from Rhonda Crate, Principal Data Scientist at Boeing and Adjunct Professor at Washington State University. We have Katie Schaefer, who is the Manager of Advanced Analytics at Beam Dental. We also have Jairus Singh, Director of Quantitative Analytics at Pandora, and Eway Sung, VP of Analytics at Amwell. So really an incredible panel with a ton of advice and experience. And please feel free to put your questions in chat. We do have a list of prepared questions, but as always, we would love to hear from you as well. So to kick things off, all of you come from data science backgrounds, and I'm really curious how that experience has helped inform your ability to manage a data science team. So I'll throw that over to Eway first.
Sure. So my background is in statistics. That's what I went to graduate school for. And that was a really natural transition. So one of my first jobs out of grad school, the title is senior analyst, but I was working with healthcare data, and the responsibilities and tasks, involved R, SQL, working with large databases, doing analyses, basically all of the range of skills you would expect a data scientist to have today. So that experience, of course, was helpful to understand the technical side. But I think just like any other job, whether it's data scientist or, marketing associate, anything, the biggest and most important part in terms of getting to where I was is learning how a business functions and just the day-to-day operations, understanding the importance of emotional intelligence, working with other people, being organized, paying attention to process. So those are, I think, more important than the actual data science technical jobs themselves. So it's just really being open and curious, as all data scientists are, to those other aspects of the job.
Rhonda, how about you? I'd love to hear how, coming from a data background has influenced your management style.
Sure. My management style is the first question. So I'm not technically a manager. I'm an associate technical fellow, which is a slightly different role than management. We really take on the technical responsibilities of the team and guiding technical vision for execution. But I'll just kind of add to my background is in statistics, and I have a needy cat right now. So I might just hold her here because otherwise she'll just keep jumping up here. I have an undergraduate and a graduate degree in anthropology, actually, which is really different than most people in this field. And especially like my anthropology degree, what happens is it just makes me realize the importance of diversity on the team, because people with different backgrounds and different skills, whether you're from statistics, CS, economics, or environmental science, everybody brings a unique perspective to solving real problems, right? And how we do that with data. And so really that's kind of what I look for in a team is, do we have different set of skills? How can we bring those skills and methodologies to solve problems that we have?
Jairus, how about you? Can you tell us a bit about your background and how that helps inform managing a data science team?
Yeah, definitely. So I came up through, the team that I now manage. So I started as an analyst on that team and sort of worked my way up to be in charge of it now. And I think the biggest thing is that when you've done the work yourself, it gives you a very, I think, good idea of how to ask people to do that work. And I try to be sort of like the boss. I think it's easy for me to ask myself, like, what was my ideal boss when I was an analyst? And then how do I try to become that? And I think it works well when you've done the work because that vision tends to be more aligned with something that's achievable and good for the business. But when you're managing people and you don't share those experiences, it's a lot harder to, one, formulate what that good boss looks like, and then also to become it. And in some cases, it may be almost unreasonable, right? If you're in charge of a bunch of different groups of teams with sort of competing priorities, you may need to make decisions that benefit one over the other. But having done the work and then having been in charge of this small team, I think I have a very good idea of what it entails and also how to make sure that it's communicated well and it maximizes impact. So sort of being the person I wanted to have when I was doing it is how I go about it. I think it's worked pretty well so far, but that's sort of my strategy. Yeah.
Cool. And then I guess, yeah, from my perspective, I would kind of echo everything everyone just said. I'd say some ads there would be coming from a PhD program or academia. I think I'm more sensitive on the hiring front to the skill set that they bring, even though oftentimes they will lack an actual job experience outside of academia. Just thinking through their experience as job experience is really important, and I think they can be valuable skill sets to the team, but then also knowing kind of the skill gaps that they'll come with, right, since they have not worked in more of an industry setting. And then I think one thing I didn't appreciate in my old job that I do appreciate in my new job. So my old job, I was a data scientist. There was no really analytics team. It was more of a consulting firm. My new job, I started out managing the analytics team. So I think finally I've gotten kind of a full circle lens of how those two teams can really complement one another, data science and analytics, the differences and kind of the complementary nature between the two. Yeah, so I'd say that definitely informs my hiring of data scientists, knowing, hey, where do we want to take and pick up some of the work that the analysts have done, and how will those two teams and two folks work together? So.
Yeah, that's really great. You've kind of queued us up for this next question. So I'm going to start with you, Katie, but I'd really love to hear, I know that everyone watching has questions about this, and I know we all have experience with this, but starting with Katie, how do you feel, or what do you feel are the best ways to assess a candidate's technical ability?
Yeah, so a lot of different options for this, of course. I think my goal as a hiring manager is just again, to your first question, right, having done the work yourself to at least some degree, I think allows you to just assess in some of their answers, do they know what they're talking about, or is there kind of a level of, are they reaching a little bit too far on some of the skills? So I think that my technical experience helps with that, but I think one thing we do here at Beam is we have a take-home test with simulated data. I think it is really important to assess those technical skills in an interview, but I think the one thing that I'm really not a fan of is kind of, to a point, I think certain more traditional like whiteboarding or brain teaser questions in interviews, I think at a certain point they kind of just measure performance under duress versus performance. So I think there's a happy medium between whether you're doing kind of a live technical interview, live coding, making that productive and worth the time in terms of assessing the skills you want to assess. Take home is certainly another route that I become a fan of, but I've seen the kind of more live technical interviews done well, and then some maybe not so well, where folks might have missed out on some good candidates just because they asked a brain teaser that the person didn't get in those 5 minutes. So that's kind of my quick take.
I'll kind of follow up. So I'm a huge fan of them basically talking about what they're passionate about and describing situations where they've actually applied it. And some of the key criteria, that we probably look for in some of those answers are like, is somebody coming up to you and asking you for advice on how to solve these problems, right? Are you being a mentor to somebody else? Because that's usually, a way that you can share your skills with somebody else. That means you're confident enough to demonstrate your skills and then share that with somebody else and basically teach, right? Also your ability to describe it in a technical manner in a situation in which you applied it, because honestly, people come from a variety of different backgrounds. There's a whole bunch of different language that different backgrounds use to describe the same processes. And so, I really like the approach of asking them to describe a situation that they've been in, what was the outcome of that, and really describe the result in a technical format in you can usually tell when somebody's passionate about something and let them kind of pursue their passions a little bit, but at the same time making sure that they have the skills that we need for the job, right?
I agree. A technical exercise is really important. I've always used them. It's really the only way you can quickly and accurately assess their technical skills. So I think it's required. Also, just the basic interviewing and job seeking 101 expectations. Well put together resume, of course. No typos, things like that. Things they teach you over and over again. And then over time, at least I like to think I've developed like a intuition also. It's more than intuition. It's on the resume. It's also in the actual interview process themselves. You can start to assess to the extent, that person's really curious and passionate about the work itself. So curiosity and energy to me are my number 1 and 2 traits that I look for. If you've only learned how to write R on for a couple of years or in grad school, I think you can pick those things up, but you can't teach someone to be really curious and really energetic. And then finally, when we do start having technical discussions, I think this is reflected in what Rhonda said. It's a matter of does this person know what they're talking about? And so I listen for, are they being specific in what they're describing? If they start speaking in generalities and vague answers, pretty quickly they aren't really well suited for this kind of job.
For sure, yeah. I'm gonna echo a lot of things that were said. I'm on team take home as well, and I hate doing brain teasers in interviews or even asking people to do them. I don't know, it feels like torture a lot of the time. But a plea for hiring managers out there, try to make sure that you're asking sort of as little of folks that you can to get a good assessment on them, to just be respectful of their time. Because what happens is, and I think it works in your favor, because you have some very bright folks out there who are like, hey, I don't know if I need to invest 4 hours into this when I have 2 offers. So you're going to turn away folks who, really do know what they're doing if you make it too sort of heavy. And the opposite logic, which I don't agree with as well, if they really cared, they would sink in all this time and energy. And I just don't agree with that. But for us, I think there's a big concern that, well, what if they get a lot of help on the take home? You're not really assessing their ability. So we like to ask a lot of follow-up questions during the interviews. And we'll usually use one of our interviews to say, okay, you made this decision here, you made this choice, or you're using this technique. Can you tell me a little more about it? And then we're doing what Eway said of, is this something that your friend told you to do and you have no idea how the technique works and you can't answer questions, or is it something that you have knowledge of? So that's how we sort of try to bring that all together in our interview process.
Yeah, that's really interesting. A lot of great perspectives here. And we've had a question from the audience that really dovetails nicely with this. So I'd be really curious if you change the way that you assess a candidate based on their kind of educational background. So for example, data science degrees are now a thing that people can get. But if someone comes from a quantitative background, computer science, statistics, data science, versus someone coming from, just a non-quantitative background, education or policy or literature, do you change how you assess that individual in an interview? Or no? Maybe everybody's a no, but I'd be really curious if there's anything, how you kind of may approach that differently, if at all.
I'd say the first thing that sticks out to me is a little bit less of what I do, kind of where the conversation heads, but to me it's really important whatever your applicant management system is, it's really important that you're keeping up with the recruiting, like the lead recruiter on it, to make sure that person gets an interview. That's what I found to be the most crucial way in which I step in, which I typically wouldn't, is just giving the head recruiter that, like, commenting when we see the application and staying super on top of it myself, because it's a little bit harder sometimes for them to spot, like, oh, well, this person with this non-traditional background has the skills you want or not. So I just make sure that I get a chance to talk to that person if I see that they've got some components that are maybe non-traditional but speak to their skill set.
Yeah, and I'll kind of add that as somebody who comes from a more non-traditional stat background, right? I graduated with a liberal arts degree, and then I got my stat degree. But I will say, like, personally, as I entered job interviewing, I was worried that my anthropology degree would actually set me back. But the reality, I mean, I still had a stat, like I still have a master's in stats, but the reality is it brought an element that differentiated me from the candidates. And I will say at Boeing, everybody gets the same opportunity of interview for that. So everybody gets the same question. So as far as that goes, that's a standardized process that our HR has developed, right? But I would encourage, like, any people that just have a solid, like, science background to go out and discover the liberal arts, because it can only make you better, right? That's my personal view on that.
I love that, right? So if you're coming from a quantitative background, go out, discover, do things outside of your educational background. So this really ties into a question, and I'd love to start with you, Jairus. Skills like empathy and communication are often mentioned as like absolute must-haves for data scientists. But how do you know a candidate has these skills?
Yeah, I went through this great training at work a while ago, and it was sort of a generalist training. It was not for hiring technical roles. It was just hiring in general. And they went over a really good framework for asking behavioral questions. And what I thought was so unusual about it was that, like, the questions to me seem to have obvious answers, but if you ask 10 people or 10 data scientists, you're going to get rid of 3 of them because they're not going to give you the answer that you would want. And so what we do is we sort of ask these, we put them in situations that are sort of undesirable. And I don't mean literally in the interview. I mean, we ask them about situations that are undesirable. You've gotten a vague request from a stakeholder, and we see how they deal with those situations. And I think folks who deal well with that, first say, okay, I get that this happens on the job, and I will work with them to come to an answer. But there's always a subset of folks who kind of put it back on you and is like, well, isn't your job to prevent these things from happening? Or like, why would I be in this position? And it's, as much as I'd love to live in a world in which it never happens, it always happens. And so it's kind of an easy way I've found to ask those behavioral questions about, difficult situations that involve working with people or communicating things to people, and seeing sort of how flexible data scientist applicants can be in their answers. So it was funny to me because when I first learned these, I'm like, well, no one's going to say like, I shouldn't do that or that's not my job. But you end up picking up a few people who genuinely do feel that way. And I'm sure they're a great fit for another role out there, but that role isn't one of ours.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of nice to get to that point where right, like you don't want to pull a candidate along if they're not a good fit. So as we're talking about hiring, Eway, I'd love to hear from you to kick things off in terms of how do you know when it's time to grow your data science team, and kind of to piggyback off of that, what strategies do you employ when you're growing your team?
Everywhere I've been, I've always been hired because they needed to grow the team. So they hired me to grow the team. So it's all, the answer is always. Pretty much most firms that are data rich obviously could stand to use more data scientists. But to answer your question directly, it's really a matter of demand, right? I've been doing this for a long time, and we just never have enough data scientists. The type of teams that I've managed have always been internal support and external support, supporting clients and supporting other functions like marketing, sales, operations, etc. So the appetite for data is bottomless. So we're always in growth mode. And then when it comes to actually building out the team, which I'm currently in the situation, I really want to try to build out a team that's diverse in all aspects, technically and experience-wise. There is no such thing as a data scientist who can do everything. I also don't want a team of data scientists where everyone has the exact same set of skills. So you're going to have people who are more experience with, on the data engineering side, people who are more experienced on the statistical modeling side, et cetera. In terms of experience, having people from different backgrounds in terms of degrees, that's a great thing because they bring different skill sets, and people from different industries, because that allows, everyone brings their best practices and we can learn and teach from each other, learn and grow from each other. And that's how I've done that. That's how I've done it. And it's worked well so far.
Yeah, I really love that statement that everybody brings their best practices. I think that that's just such a wonderful way to think about growing a team. So I would also really love to hear from folks. We have a question from the audience around managers staying in the code. So in other words, what are your thoughts and feelings about management and being a manager? And should a manager still be able to write and review code as well as solve technical questions?
If you're at a startup, yes. Yeah, I've flamed out a few times at a few startups, and not surprisingly, you're short-staffed there, so you're expected to pitch in. But in my experience, and this is just my experience, only in healthcare, once you go beyond the director level, I think it's important for the manager to actually be the one managing, because again, this goes back to my firm belief that process is really important. You can't just have people just running around doing whatever they want to do. You have to steer the ship, everyone in the right direction. It's a lot of work, I can still read R, a little bit, but I won't be nearly as efficient as the people who are actually much better at it. So you don't want me writing the code. Instead, you want me going out there. You want your manager going out there and think of it this way: finding more business for the team, because finding more business for the team, whether it's internal or external, means more opportunities for you to do other things. Work on other subject areas, add additional technical skills. So that's how I think. That's how I view myself.
I'll kind of add, because I'm not a manager, right? But that's one of the great and awesome things about Boeing is we kind of have different career paths. So you can go into management, or you can be just a really awesome employee, or you can go into the technical fellowship, which is a career path driven towards technical excellence. And like I'm an Boeing designated expert, right? There's not very many of those at the Boeing company. And so that's awesome. Like, I can help you program, and management can really focus on those more HR and going out and getting the business things, while at the same time technical fellows also can kind of participate in that going out and getting the business and where the technical vision and things like that are. And so I think I like Boeing for that, because if you really want to focus on technical excellence, you can really drive your career in that direction. You don't necessarily have to end up in management. So that's all I'll add.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, with that being said, though, managers should still be data literate. All right, that's it.
I love it. I love the enthusiasm. Katie and Jairus, anything to add on that? I'm seeing like a lot of nodding, so I'm not sure if we're all like, yeah, I agree with this, or maybe someone is like, no, absolutely, managers should be coding every day.
I think it really, just like others have said, depends on the stage of the company. So I think at a certain point, while it sounds nice, I think it'd be fun. It can be unrealistic to expect that somebody who's managing multiple different teams or folks has the time to program considerably every day. But I do think you need to have a level of competency, and ideally you have had experience in the role or akin to the role in your history. Because I think if you don't have enough experience, it can be hard to spot the root cause of some like personnel issues or maybe other friction you're experiencing. Because if you can't go in and assess the issues with the code or the performance, it'll be hard for you as a manager to do that. But at a certain point, hopefully you've staffed up a successor who is able to do that for you, so you can focus on the other kind of higher level things in terms of where are we taking the team, what kind of projects are we taking on. But for me, it is important that I do write code from time to time, especially as projects are kicking off. But certainly, I think it depends on where you're at in terms of whether that should be a daily thing or you should be actually moving projects forward yourself. But I think having that skill set is important to make sure your team's functioning properly and you're hiring the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this emphasis on, you've mentioned where if you're starting a project, you're much more involved with code. And Eway mentioned a lot about like the stage of the organization. So I kind of want to pivot a little bit, and I'll throw it to Jairus first, but I want to talk about something that, at least on social media, I think gets a lot of play. And that is about hiring someone with the potential to learn and grow. So we see a lot of advice from things like, I don't meet 100% of the requirements, or I only meet 60%. And so you'll see mixed advice from things like, oh, as long as you meet 50%, you should apply, or, it doesn't even matter, just apply for it, like just go for it. And then you'll see people who are like, no, you've got to be able to do 80% or 90%. So when we're thinking about hiring someone with the potential to learn and grow, how do you assess this in a candidate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think almost everybody is in this boat where they're not matching all of the, criteria that have been laid out. So, if the company does indeed, box number 7 does indeed need that, like you have to convince them that this is something I can pick up over time. I think one of the best indicators is just a track record of having done this in the past. So when you're positioning yourself for the role, if you can look at prior experience and say, I did this role and I didn't have XYZ, but these are things that I picked up in the context of it. I think that's a really strong, you're showing that I've done this before and I'm looking to do it again. So that's the best way I've seen it positioned, because you do have a lot of candidates who say, yeah, I'll pick it up, but only a subset of them are like, here's sort of my track record of having done this in the past in prior roles or in school or what have you. I think actually school is a good example as well, because you have folks who need to learn a programming language to do a specific, project. And so they can bring that to light as well. But I think showing that track record is really effective, because it goes beyond saying, trust me, I'll do it, but like, trust me, I'll do it because I've done it before.
I would add too, like if the candidate expressed any interest in continuing education programs at the company, right? So Boeing offers a lot of continuing education programs. And so if you're like really interested in learning and expanding one area, say like, oh, I'm really interested in geospatial data science, right? Because there's not a lot of opportunities for that maybe when you went to school or whatnot. And maybe that was one of the small things on the resume. And you're like, hey, do you offer any internal programs towards this, or somewhere where I could learn and expand that particular skill? I always look for those kind of opportunities in an interview too.
I'd love to hear from other panelists. I think my challenge is doing this for more junior candidates, where often there isn't that experience. So you kind of have to go off of how they answer things. If anybody's found a magic bullet there, I'd love to hear from it. But I think that can be the most challenging spot for me, is when somebody's junior, you don't necessarily have the expectation that they would have had that experience because you're hiring a junior role. To me, those are the biggest blind spots, other than kind of how they approach the project, how they answer questions. You have kind of the least amount to go off of to know, okay, I know this person's going to need a lot of support when they start, but how do I get more reassurance that 6 months from their starting point or 9 months from their starting point, they're going to be one of those people who's just kind of self-sufficient. So kind of an ask comes in, maybe it's more vague. They will develop that kind of more harder to find skill set of managing and kind of doing things from start to finish on their own. I think that can be a little more challenging for the junior folks.
Sure. Go ahead, Jairus, please.
I just had a real quick thing I saw someone do during an interview that stood out, which is when you talk about concepts or techniques that the person is not familiar with, people with that sort of growth mindset will make a note and engage with you more and say, I want to learn more about this later. Some other folks, they get really embarrassed. I don't know that. And they try to steer the conversation away. And I thought it was impressive when someone both admits to me, I hadn't heard of that and I will go look it up later. And then sometimes you get the follow-up email, hey, I read about this. So that really stood out to me as a positive behavior that I think indicated the potential for growth in the future and the interest as well. I'll throw it to you, Eway.
Sure, thanks. A couple things. I think everyone who applies to be a data scientist at least has one thing they're more comfortable with. So whether it's, again, statistics or programming in one language versus another, I asked them about that and how they, came about to pick up those skills. It's also, you can see it also on their resumes and in their conversations too, like, hey, I stumbled upon this because, I was a graduate student in this field and I started doing data analysis and I realized this is what I want to do, not, X engineering. I don't want to pick on a particular engineering, but, um, you know, somebody in the X engineering field does a lot of data analysis and realize their passion is in data. And so tell me what specifically about it. Do you like the programming part? Everyone has a thing, that they're pretty good at, better than other aspects of data science. And or if they're much more junior, I ask about their interests outside of data science. What's the thing that you love doing? Is it ballet dancer or cooking? There's always disciplines that transfer really well, because in my mind it's about process and practice. I don't see data science as any different. It's process and practice.
Yeah, I will just add kind of quickly from my my experience as being an adjunct professor, and it is interesting moving from like this graduate frame of mind to the fact that certain universities are now offering undergraduate degrees in data analytics, and the breadth and experience is a lot smaller. It's a lot smaller of a window, right? And teaching a senior capstone class is really giving me insight on how students actually think about these, and then thinking about how does that translate when they go and try to interview for a job, because obviously, like, most of them probably just went through the general education requirements, and then those last 2 or 3 semesters of school, they were really cramming in like all these kind of analytics classes. They don't know how to describe a logistic regression to you. They're just, really starting at that very fundamental phrase. And I will say, like, I enjoy also mentoring the students, because in the capstone class, we spend some time talking about how do you do interviewing strategy, especially like on your resume, you were, like you worked at the deli at Safeway or something, right? And so I talk about really expand on that experience working at the deli counter, talk about like you were employee of the month. Why were you employee of the month, right? Really accentuate those skills and talk about your areas and passion of why you picked this major to begin with, and then how can you apply those to this job if you're given, the opportunity to do that. And that's usually just general advice I give the students, because yeah, it has been enlightening seeing it from both ends. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think something that everyone's touched on is this idea of being able to articulate what skills you have and how they translate to data science. So not all of your skills have to be in data science, but they do still relate to your ability to do data science. And related to that, we have a question about thinking about candidates and how, if at all, you weigh their non-technical contributions to the broader data science community, whether that's through social media, blogging, YouTube tutorials, anything that a candidate does that's maybe kind of in this amorphous, they're not doing it for work, they're doing it because they're really curious and passionate. Does that come into play for you when analyzing or kind of deciding on a candidate? And if so, how?
Not for me. I mean, it's, to me, their social media interactions are, things they do on their own time, which is great, but I don't think it has any bearings on the actual application itself. It's, do I think they can do the job or not?
I'd say I have a slightly different perspective. I'd say at the end of the day, my focus is definitely, can they do the job or not? So it's not a requirement by any means. I feel like I've hired great folks who don't have some sort of blog or data science side hustle, but it is a plus when I see that, because to me, I think what I do care about is that you are, depending on the level, if you're a more senior candidate, that you are going to be staying on top of like what is new packages, new trends, new programs, new methods, right? Like if I'm hiring you for doing NLP analysis, like that space is changing so constantly, it would be impossible to think that one person could keep up with that and all the different things, right? So if that's what you're going to be a specialist in, I think it's a great plus to show your hunger for that. But I think I've definitely seen folks who demonstrate that hunger and that kind of up to speed with current state who maybe don't have a blog or don't run a chapter of, Pi Ladies or Our Ladies or something. So I think it's a big plus, but I think you can demonstrate it in other ways. So that's how I view it.
Yeah, and I'll just add, at Boeing, we're not necessarily allowed to participate in certain things. And so I always just want to add, as other hiring people, sometimes that should weigh in as part of the consideration as well. But with that being said, especially if you're working in a research and technology branch, I would expect you to participate in professional associations, right? And especially as part of the technical fellowship, some of it is your external connections and how people are looking at you technically, but that is at a level of technical excellence, right? Versus I just like to write and blog. So I would say during our interview, I can't really give you an answer to how that weighs at Boeing. I would just say that sometimes just consider that maybe those people are not actually allowed to participate in those channels as well.
Yeah, to add to this is a really tricky one for me because as much as I think it's fair to say, yeah, the person's showing passion, they're showing the ability to maybe build communities or to engage, in a broader sense in data science, I don't want to create a world in which future data scientists feel like they need to have a blog or they need to have an active social media, because some people have no interest in doing that. And I think they should be able to get data science positions without having to do it. So I haven't had a lot of candidates cross my desk that do have, hey, check out my data science Twitter. Personally, I enjoy them, but I would just hate to pick someone over someone else because, someone is sort of more naturally inclined to do that sort of work than someone else. And then of course it depends on the quality of the work. I think something as simple as I have a friend who works for a large tech company in advertising, and every week explains an advertising term to all of his followers, many of whom don't work in advertising. And I thought that was a really cool, simple way of teaching folks more about sort of the ecosystem that he works with. He's in sales, so it probably helps him generate more, but just a really small, elegant way to show I have knowledge and I want to share it with the community, and it doesn't seem like too much of a heavy lift. I don't think he's applying, but if he was, I feel like that's something he could bring up, and maybe that's a lighter weight way of demonstrating that you have the ability to communicate and participate.
Yeah.
I'm really glad this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm really glad this topic is being discussed. I agree with Katie in that it's important for people to stay up to date. I love Twitter because I'm an avid follower of folks on stats Twitter, our Twitter, machine learning Twitter, whatever. So that helps me stay up to date and find resources there for sure. So this is more of a cautionary point in that I also see a lot of data science enthusiasts on Twitter who, I don't know if this is true or not, I worry that they're learning data science or stats too much from Twitter. There's only so much you can learn from, was it 280 characters? I can't remember, and you really have, this is a slow skill that you have to acquire with hard work, not a fast skill that you can just pick up with tweets. Twitter is great for finding links and to longer blogs or resources, but I would not substitute, hey, I follow this 20 tweet thread and now I know X skill, right? That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I think these are all fantastic. There's a lot of really great advice in here. And I think social media is very rewarding, but it's also that quick kind of reward. And I love this idea of thinking about, using social media as a starting place or as an inspiration, but to make sure you're kind of don't let the underlying work of learning to be a data scientist and continue growing your data science skill set suffer for your social media. This is very hard for me to say as someone who lives on social media, but yes, do the work. Social media is like the candy later. So there's one question, we're going to kind of drastically shift gears a little bit because I really, really, really want to make sure that we get a chance to answer this. And Katie, I would love to start with you. I would love to know how you think about and define the differences between a data analyst and a data scientist.
Yeah, so I'm sure this looks different a lot of places, but one kind of division of skills that's resonated for me. So from a technical perspective, if I think of where like our analysts versus data scientists are spending their time, I think a lot of analysts are spending and tend to be a little bit stronger on the SQL, typically, just to be honest, in the industry, BI tools, so Tableau, Looker, Power BI. And then my ideal analyst would also be able to dabble in Python or R. So they'd be able to pick up R or Python for some deeper analyses when they need to. I've come to realize when I got out of consulting, though, that a lot of times they're super strong in SQL. They do a lot of that in SQL, but we found opportunities for doing something in R or Python instead when that's the better tool for the job. And I'd say from a job perspective, analysts tend to be just have a greater variety of projects going on that tend to be more focused around business problems and kind of maybe more qualitative post hoc analyses versus forward-looking models. To contrast with the data scientist, R and Python, like strong expertise in one of those is a must versus kind of a nice to have, or I will teach it as we go. The background in statistics is also crucial. I think some kind of foundations are crucial for an analyst, but I wouldn't necessarily expect an analyst to be extremely deep, just in the way that I wouldn't expect a data scientist to maybe be apt for sitting in on a bunch of business meetings across a variety of areas and answering a variety of one-off questions. The data scientist time should be more focused on protected on specific projects. And so it's, to me, from a skill set perspective, that statistics training, R, Python, high level of competency that kind of set things apart, and a little slightly less kind of forward facing with multiple different kind of stakeholders from a business perspective.
So I will say my first job was a data analyst because there was no title data scientist. And I did the same exact thing, in all honesty. But with that being said, at the Boeing company, it would probably come up as a programmer analyst job, kind of what Katie was describing. And so I think it's really important to not necessarily pay attention to the title, but really read what the job description is saying and ask questions when you get an interview about the job itself, because yeah, it's just, there's so much variety, and like you could be a research analyst at Amazon or something, for example, right? So.
Yeah, if I can chime in here, I don't know who's asking the question. They might be a job seeker, but I can give my definitions, but unfortunately, when a lot of people in the industry don't adhere to, a strict definition of one or the other, I think the most important thing to do when looking for jobs is what as Rhonda said, what does the job entail? And not just what's written, but ask follow-ups, because sometimes they say you're going to be doing 7 things, but it's really 2 of those 7 things that you're going to be doing. And so try to narrow in on that sort of as gracefully as possible. But the thing I've seen happen in the market, because I mentor students who are going on to get their first jobs, is that data scientists, a lot of people put that above data analysts, and certainly in pay that happens a lot. But you have a lot of companies now treating a data analyst role and calling a data scientist to generate more sort of interest in it. And so again, focus on what is it that you're asked to be doing, to do, what are the skills that are needed. But if you have a LinkedIn alert up now, like put both on it. I think that's prudent.
Yeah, I agree. It depends entirely on the company. My experience is, I'll call it analyst. A lot of companies I see have analyst positions as part of a function. So an analyst within the marketing team or analyst within the operations team, where they'll be responsible for, using data to help improve the operations or just, work within that function. And oftentimes they will have, SQL skills or maybe some other skills like R or Python, but generally they typically work with, Excel, which is I love Excel. I use it all the time. So that's what I see in terms of analysts. And then separately, I see, I'll call it BI developers and data scientists. There's a lot of overlapping skills there, writing a lot of SQL, of course, and then automating the data flow. The distinction being the BI developers are primarily about building and publishing reports in whatever fashion, whether it's files or dashboards or what have you. Whereas data scientists tend to also have, in addition to that, the statistical modeling and insight responsibilities. So those are the three main areas that I see.
This is great. I was kind of hoping that all four of you would land on a very clear, concise definition that you all agreed on, and we could solve this problem for the rest of the industry, but it's okay. It's okay. So I hope that everybody at home is like, I think this is all really valuable information. And I think, this advice too, if you've got that job notification, to put both titles in, because it will vary by industry and it's going to vary by company. So with that, I would love to kind of think a little bit about how you go about shortlisting a candidate's resume or CV. So in other words, what makes someone stand out to go from that initial, we've got 500 resumes. What do you use to help make that cut or make that decision for who you're going to kind of at least do that initial phone call with?
Do we have a review team?
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. I think it's different everywhere, right? So some places the hiring manager may have to filter all of the resumes as they come in, whereas in other places, I think there is kind of an HR department or a review team that makes those decisions. So I'd love to hear what your organization uses. And then once you get the resumes, kind of how do you then start winnowing things down?
So I will say, we generally will start with a list of skills that we're interested in, depending on the position, and then we look to see if those are somewhat contained in the resume. And it really depends on the type of job. I feel like internships are probably a lot more flexible, right? Where we have, you can go out to our internship website externally right now, and you can see the different buckets that you can apply for an internship. And so, once you've applied for that bucket will go to a review team. We'll be looking for some specific different list of skills, and those could be a wide variety of skills because we have a whole bunch of different managers, right? And so I would say there's definitely, depending on the type of position and the type of interview style going on, there's kind of a different process behind each one of those. So that one kind of makes it hard to answer. Hope that helps.
I'm lucky to have a talent acquisition function that helps me first filter on the technical skills. I tell them, okay, SQL and R or Python or or some other programming experience, some preferably quantitative background, but it doesn't have to be. It could be, a liberal arts degree. I'm a liberal arts major. And then once I see the resume, it's I don't want to see a 4-page resume with 1,000 programming skills. Less is more. I'm looking for depth. Have you done a few things really well as opposed to many things over time? Because I'm trying to build a team where we have a team of experts with different expertise. And so having someone who's really good at one thing is really valuable. So that will complement someone who's really good at something else. That's how I prefer to hire, but obviously that's just my personal preference.
I'd say one thing I'd add that I saw on a few resumes I thought was super cool were, I know from an applicant perspective, it can be hard to list the programming languages you're familiar without feeling a little fraudulent. Like for me, I'm definitely stronger in R, but I know some Python. But if I just put Python as a language on my resume, it could feel misleading. I'm not like an expert Python programmer. I'm more like basic intermediate. So rather than spelling out all those with the levels, I've seen like on a sidebar, like a nice graph that's almost like a bar chart of competency. And so you'd have your top, like that's the full bar, and then everything else would be just arbitrary percentages for competency. It might even be like a markdown template, actually, I think, for the resume that it was generated on. So check that out. I thought that was just a nice way to showcase, hey, I'm competent in all these languages to varying degrees without having like a super long detailed section. And it's a nice little graph. So I thought that was cool.
Do you have to specify the scale?
This was not. This was just a visual. So I guess it depends on how tight you want to be.
That's how you trick people. I'm a D in my R ability, and then everything else is lower.
Yeah, everything else.
But if you don't label it, they don't know.
Yeah, and I would say like it definitely depends on a personal perception,
Yeah.
right?
It was,
for sure.
It was a bad joke.
More of a rank order relative strength. So it's up to, I guess, you as the interviewer to determine like, okay, what's their 100% at?
Yeah.
With that being said, I'd like to point out like resume formatting, right? Some systems will not take bar charts into the resume format, right? And a lot of times they will get printed out on grayscale. So don't make it all nice and colorful. Make sure like if you do use color that it's going to look nice in black and white. That's just some of my pointers I give to students, because you see some of them get really creative and you're like, yes, that's wonderful. I applaud your creativity. Just make sure it looks good in black and white. So.
Yeah, the resume is so important. Just reminder that we have typically 300 to 500 resumes to get through. So if you submit a novel, it's gonna go right past it.
Yeah, that's some other things I say. Make sure like you bold stuff that somebody can quickly glance at it in 30 seconds for the first review, right? And you've got their attention, then they'll go back and look at it a little bit more detail if they see something like that really pops out. So I always say like bold those important things, and make it about you, because I've had like students will put an order on their resume. For example, the last class I noticed did a lot of this, like they'll put the company name first and not the position name. I'm like, no, talk about you. What did you do? The company is relative, right? I mean, great, this was at Microsoft, but it's far more important for me to see what you did at Microsoft. So, I mean, just me personally, like I like that order of like, I can see what you did, and then I'll look and see where you did it at. That's just my own personal preference, but it's like, because I want to know about you. I don't want to know about Microsoft, for example. I'm using that as an example. Maybe I shouldn't. But.
It doesn't have to be a data science job that you've had. If you had some side hustle in college, I think that's really valuable. It shows initiative, for example.
Yeah, we've got tons of great advice. And I feel like I'll talk to Chris. I feel like we could do a whole panel on resumes and how to build your data science resume. We could definitely keep this conversation going for another couple of hours, but we are coming up on the top of the hour. And I have been given the responsibility to make sure that we finish on time. So with that being said, I do want to give each of our panelists a minute or two to summarize their best advice for a data science job seeker or data science manager, and if applicable, to tell us about any openings they may have on their team. And so to avoid the, oh gosh, who goes next? We'll go Jairus, Katie, Eway, and we'll close out with Rhonda.
Yeah, sorry, Jesse, can you repeat the first question? It was, what is the best advice?
Yeah, so you've got about a minute to tell our amazing community and audience, what is your advice for a data science job seeker or a data science manager?
Okay. Yeah, the best thing I guess I would want to see from job seekers that a lot of folks I see not doing is putting in a little effort to understand the business that they're applying to, how it works and what their products are. And it's amazing what 15 minutes, either downloading it if it's free or looking at recent news or understanding how the business is set up, can do to set you apart from other folks. Because a lot of folks do come in sort of expecting, tell me the metrics you care about, and I'll tell you about fancy stuff you can do with it. But if I am looking to grow you within the role and have you sort of act more autonomously over time, I'd love to see your ability to bring that to the table instead of me having to sort of feed you everything. So there is always, 10, 20% of candidates who do that. And I think they get the disproportionate number of job offers out there because of their ability to do so. And again, I don't think it's a ton of effort. So I think that's something that can set you apart. And again, it's a minority of folks who I think do this and do this well. We're filling a job like today. I'm sorry, everyone, but I know you mentioned like we can do a plug. Yeah, we're extending an offer today. But if folks see positions at SiriusXM, Pandora, Stitcher, or One Big Happy Family, yeah, feel free to reach out. Let me know, and I can give you some advice on what you should apply to, and happy to help you out as I can.
Cool. I actually really agree with that advice. Always come with a list of questions, but I'll try to make this additive. So before I forget, we do have an opening for a senior data scientist. So head out to beam.dental and check out our career site. Would love to hear from you. I'd say probably less so, I guess, relevant at the company I'm currently at. We're kind of a mid-growth stage startup, but for sure hearing it in some of Rhonda's answers, et cetera, at bigger companies, I think it's tough when you don't know anybody who works at the company, just making sure somebody sees your resume. So I'd say the additive advice I would have maybe is like, I mean, I am not above, if I'm job searching, like stalking the recruiting team at that company and messaging them on LinkedIn, right? Like just making sure some human sees your resume, I think can be super important if you don't know anybody there, because it would be a shame if it just got tossed out for some silly reason. So I try to be super hands-on with all the resumes we see, so I don't have that great PhD student slip through the cracks, but I think that can happen sometimes, just because of the sheer volume of resumes that these teams get and how many openings they have. So try to find a physical human to message if you can.
Quick plug, we have 2 openings, one for either principal or lead / senior data scientist position, and there's also one opening for senior BI developer. Amwell is a telemedicine company, so we have lots of data. In terms of my advice, I think it's important to understand the distinction between having the technical skills to do the job of a data scientist, but then you also need to make sure, and this has been mentioned before, that you have the statistics knowledge as well. You can perform the tasks required, write SQL, write R, but if you really don't understand what it is the models represent, that can limit your growth. So that's my advice.
All right. So I always have kinds of advice, but if you're female, you can do it. You can apply for data science jobs. My first thing. My second is always pick something that you're passionate about. You'll be far more interested in it. Don't just pick a job just because it's a data science job. Pick something that you're truly enthusiastic about. And as far as Boeing hiring, we are always hiring. We are a global company with wide, vast, diverse positions open. And like you could work anywhere from like Spain, Australia, Singapore to the US, about anywhere in the US you could imagine. Not everywhere, but good, diverse positions. So I'd really encourage you to look at Boeing Careers. I forget the exact website, but I can always pass it around, or you can put it into Google and you'll find it pop up. And I would just say, if you are looking for a job there, make sure you use a vast variety of different terms, because for us, it's, I am a data scientist at Boeing. That is technically my skill code, but we also have applied statisticians, applied mathematicians. We have advanced technologists. All of those are similar types of jobs. We even have data science engineering skill code. We, people who focus on AI, machine learning, autonomy systems. We have library services. We have health services. We have our own fire department. So there's just a wide variety of job opportunities for you at the Boeing company. That's my plan for Boeing.
Awesome. That is amazing. So this is such incredible advice from all of you. Like, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise. So as we close out our session, I of course want to thank you personally. I am going to thank you on behalf of RStudio, and especially on behalf of our community, everyone who is watching live right now and everyone who is going to tune in over the coming weeks and months. You have been phenomenal guests, and I know I've learned a tremendous amount, and I know that everyone watching has also learned an incredible amount. So with that, our panel conversation has come to an end, and I want to wish you all a phenomenal day. And I hope we can talk again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Yeah.